So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 12:05. I guess as people jump on, we'll just go ahead and continue from there. So, okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything launched off for everybody. So perfect. Welcome, everyone. Wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to join our 2020 Year-End Finance Tech Conference, CFO Challenges and Strategies in a Changing World. We'll be discussing several topics today, covering what we've experienced to be the most important relevant to CFOs in today's market. We'll be holding a Q&A at the end of this event, so please write down any questions that you have, and we'll address those at the end of the presentations. Our discussions of topic and the flow of the presentation will include introduction to Henry Park, CEO of 3GC Group and Pandoblox. He'll be discussing digital transformation in today's market and how his experience in working with CFOs and C-level execs throughout the past year. And then we'll move to our next speaker, Philip Gay, who will address the current state of the market from a CFO's perspective. We'll then move on to managing and growing a remote workforce and how to measure ROI and KPIs while managing remotely. Making sure you're getting effectively measuring the ROI and expectation you have from your employees on a day-to-day basis. Next discussion point will be security and compliance, discussing the market, exposure and risk CFOs are facing, and the current disruptions. And lastly, probably most importantly, finance operations optimization. Getting the reports, data, and information you need in a timeline that matches the even faster pace that we're all dealing with COVID and the volatile market we're in. I'll be making individual introductions to each of the speakers and their perspective discussion points, as we come up throughout the presentation. And I must say, we truly do have an all-star lineup. I'm not saying this because I know each of them individually, but because they are true mastery of each of their respective skill sets, and together as a group, we form 3GC Group. This will be an information-packed event, and we'll follow up with the opportunity to have a personalized one-on-one assessment with whichever the speakers and discussion points you choose. I will go through over this more and more in depth at the end of the presentation, but the assessments which we're offering are something unique, something that none of the other consulting firms in the market will be able to offer with the level of experience and expertise, which you'll be able to see through our speakers today. Let me start by introducing Henry Park, our CEO and president of both 3GC Group and Pandoblox. Give me 1 second.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate everyone coming together last minute. We were debating on whether we should do it this month or next month. We had a lot of clients who were asking about our digital solutions. I think one of the big things that I'm noticing is CFOs and CEOs getting more involved with technology strategy than ever before. I think it's pretty obvious the reason why. Everyone's dealing with various different business challenges through the pandemic, and so this year has been an evolving year for us. We've traditionally done a lot of infrastructure consulting and managed services, but those solutions, as they get rolled out, need to be integrated into the business a lot tighter, where the data from these tools need to be farmed and mined and integrated into the business in a faster pace than people have been used to. And so we've been just having a lot of meetings with CFOs this year and CEOs and private equity about strategies on digitalizing a lot of different workflows that clients are dealing with, where the infrastructure that we were traditionally touching before are now being integrated into. And with that, with the data comes a lot of security. And so, one of the trends that I see happening, a big mega trend, is this convergence of the CIO and the CFO. And I'm not saying that in a competitive way. I think it's more of an alignment, where we're seeing a lot of CIOs being involved in roles that CFOs traditionally have been in, and then CFOs being involved in CIO roles that traditionally have been siloed. They're really converging. And so, there's this topic that we've been talking about a lot this year, which is the topic of the digital CFO. And that one was brought to us by a CFO, where one of the CFOs that we were consulting with was basically saying, his role was getting a lot more digitized, and he didn't know what to call it because he sort of felt like he was being a CIO. But I thought that was pretty interesting, as we talked to a lot more financial influencers of our clients, everyone's sort of agreeing, yeah, we're having to be a lot more involved in data and a lot more involved in digital initiatives for the business, whether it be e-commerce, whether it be, getting a lot more data out of their clients and utilizing that for marketing purposes and financial strategies or whatnot. And so, that's the reason why we started this. This is going to be a big marketing focus for us going into 2021. We've been reformulating all of our managed services to really align with this, digital forward business model. So, when Ryan talks about the assessment at the end, I see it as a pretty big value proposition, and I'm not just touting our team here. It's, time and time again, what we found is that the experience that this team brings to the table is by far, I mean, we're talking 10x, 20x more value than a lot of the other consulting firms that do it from an academic standpoint or from a benchmarking standpoint. So, to give you an example, Deloitte and KPMG, they follow this model where, they can put a lot of matrix and measurements into things and come out with a 100-page report, but at the end of it, there's really nothing actionable. And that's probably one of the biggest critiques that we've found from CFOs and CEOs is we've paid a hefty lot of money for a nice report, but what do we do with it? And so oftentimes we get brought in after the due diligence process and they don't know what to do with the roadmap and how to execute on it, and we'll go in and redo it. What we found is that the experience we bring to the table with our assessments is by far a lot more valuable to the business operational, right? And so when we're talking about an assessment, we're not talking about an assessment where we're going to put together a 100-page questionnaire, assign it to a kid out of college, and have them, work with you to fill it out, and then behind the scenes, we put together a templated report that's 100 pages long with a lot of benchmarking analysis that won't be relevant for you. It's this team actually going out there and meeting with you. And this is a very, very senior experienced team that have led their own digital transformations in their career in very successful companies that you guys have probably heard of already. And so really looking forward to hearing what they've seen in the market as well. And at the end, we'll talk through the logistics of that assessment. It'll be a free assessment, but keep in mind that this is a pretty high demand service, and so we can't do all three of them, but we'll have 3 different assessments that you can choose from. And if you can pick one of those, we'll go take you through the process and actually give you a report on our suggestions and our advice to what you guys are dealing with. Back to you, Ryan.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Henry. I didn't actually get the total chance to make an introduction of your background, but thank you. I appreciate the overview of how you work with CFOs and what we're doing today. But I want to give everyone a little background on Henry. He's a true entrepreneur, and he has 17 years of technology consulting experience. And his approach is more of an effectual approach instead of a typical management consulting approach. And what that means is more of a forward-thinking, resource-driven as it is. So you as CFOs look at from whatever resources we have. That's the same way that Henry handles things. Overall, he's just an outstanding human being as well. During COVID, he head up the Gorilla Mask movement, which provided PPE equipment for a lot of the frontline workers that's taken place. So just wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to Henry for all of the work he's done this year and everything that he's spearheaded in this industry with everything going on. So let's go ahead and move on to current state of the market. I want to introduce a personal friend of mine, Philip Gay. He's going to go ahead and discuss from a CFO's perspective current state of the market. And Philip is a phenomenal resource, an advisor, and just a true plethora of information when it comes to anything finance as far as it goes. He has 30 years experience in the industry, mergers and acquisitions, a long list of accomplishments. So Philip, the floor is yours.
Ryan, well, thank you for that introduction, and hopefully it's not downhill from here going forward for the next 10 minutes. But Henry, Ryan, and team, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about the current state of the business world, and boy, what a state it's in. So I just want to kind of expand a little bit on my background for the first 29 plus years, working exclusively in restaurant and hospitality. I've been very fortunate to work with some fine brands. In my early career, I was the original CFO at California Pizza Kitchen, and I saw it grow from an entrepreneurial startup restaurant company to ultimately being with a Fortune 50 company when we sold half the company to PepsiCo. And during that evolution, we started with scratch sheets to prepare our financials. And then we grew our finance department. And as the company grew, we grew our IT department, our HR, training, operations. And there were plenty of silos as the company grew. And anytime we had to make decisions, normally we went out and evaluated systems. It spent months going through it. We had our RFPs. I always remember we bought an AS400, and I'm looking at some of the faces. I think that was technology that was around before you, but it was a six-figure investment in the 80s. And it took a long time to get to that solution. And, we grew, and then we learned that there were other methodologies. We joined with PepsiCo, and instead of having those silos, we went through the world of shared services, and all these business models grew. I then got kind of my first PhD there. I got my second PhD. I ran a high growth restaurant company called Real Concepts, which was casual dining and fine dining on American cuisine, where I took it from $1 stock to $10. And then I took it back from $10 to $1 in the last recession. And the theme throughout is, once you go through these sessions, once you have to pivot, because all industries and all companies have to pivot or die in this environment, what were the learnings and how has it evolved, and how was it set up for when we came to the pandemic that is only 9 short months ago, and how's the world changed since then? And the common theme is that as finance leaders, we have to lead the change, and we have to figure out ways to get more with less. The theme throughout is, how do we get more with less? So as you segregate the restaurant industry, you can see some of the industry in terms of the quick serve with drive-throughs and everything else. Life's good to them because they don't have touch points. People just want the food, go and be done. But the rest of the industry, fast casual, and fine dining, has been suffering immensely. And it's kind of what's happening is the trends are against what is the basic DNA of a business. The restaurant industry is a people business. You can't replace people with technology. Or if you can, you've got to go through all these massive changes. Well, it's not true, because everything that's there, there's solutions for. And the changes to get them have just come much more quickly than anyone ever imagined. So I'm going to talk about a couple of examples and how basically all the teams have to come together, and as finance leaders, you have to drive the change. So one of my clients last year was starting with facial recognition, actually called Pop ID, and they had this wonderful technology that they've been working on. And they were struggling, but they were getting a lot of traction as they were going along. And then all of a sudden came the pandemic. Well, then they were able to tie in the facial recognition to temperature checking. So now you couldn't get into a building or a restaurant without your temperature being checked. And now they've gone further. They've worked with Speed and CDC, and now they will be able to tell in the future if you've had a vaccine or not. And we're all lining up for our vaccine, but it's hard to know whether you had it or not. But it will allow people to be safe with the changes. And where traditionally, if I go back to my days at California Pizza Kitchen, this wouldn't have fallen in any technology. It wouldn't have been the IT department. It would have been the ops department who would have led that change to embrace it. The interesting thing too is that you go back over history, some of these proposals would have been large investments in dollars, whereas now it's really, hey, there's really a no risk look to try it. And here's a new way of looking and changing the paradigm to be able to get more with less. taking that evolution and looking throughout a restaurant, you can't take short order cooks out of the kitchen. You need someone to cook a burger. Well, that's not true. Another one of the clients, they've combined operations, finance, and technology, and they've come up with Flippy. And Flippy is an automatic burger flipper that flips burgers and doesn't want workers' comp, doesn't want vacation, doesn't get COVID, and is a technology solution that allows you to really be more efficient in your restaurant. Cash handling in restaurants, well, the airlines solved that by saying, hey, you must have a credit card, no cash. In the restaurants, if you're a casual dining, fine dining restaurant, you have servers. And one thing servers love is they love to walk with their cash tips at the end of the day. Well, under COVID, here we have pandemics and everything is about a no-touch situation. Don't touch this, don't touch that, keep everyone healthy. So you can't go to the bank, you never have cash. And now there's technology solutions, and I just call them the Venmo of tipping, where and whether it's Kickfin or TipServe or any one of those solutions that are out there, that you're able to go in, lead the change as a finance person, and get the changes in place. Operations love you, they've got more time, and you're able to still operate and get the same information with less people. In terms of the obvious one, now we all have less people working in the back office. So how do we measure how do we measure productivity? And we're all doing Zoom meetings now versus versus in person. This would be a fun meeting to have in person, but unfortunately we can't. And now we're embracing technology. Normally I should have slides up, but hopefully my voice is overtaking the slides. But how do we manage more? How do we manage to get more with less? It's the technology, more with less. And finance leaders, we have to embrace it. 9 months ago, I had never used Zoom. I didn't know the methodologies or anything else, and we would have left it to IT or training or ops. You have to lead those changes. And the restaurant industry is just really embraced all of this going forward. In the lastly, the changes you're seeing in the restaurant industry too is traditionally it was a restaurant where you came, you ate, and you enjoyed your food on premise. Well, that's not the case now. So when you look at the last recession, we had the growth of the fast casual industry that didn't exist pre 2008, 2009. And now in this pandemic, we saw the beginning of ghost and virtual kitchens. So it was a restaurant without brick and mortars. And now that's really evolved to the next step. And again, as finance leaders, how do you get more revenue and more profitability out of the business where you're embracing these changes and doing the same methodology different and getting more results with less? It's been challenging times, and really a finance leader really needs to grab all the alternatives that are out there to be able to allow the businesses to really pivot and change. Because it's very easy to get dragged down in kind of what I would call the busy work, which is ultimate to survive. The last 9 months have been a blur where people have been involved in PPP stimulus funding, idle funding, redoing landlord leases, everything else. But that's not going to help the business get to thrive, and the need for more immediate data and to get the data quickly, because all historical trends from restaurants and everything you knew previously has gone out the window. So finally, I'll wrap it up by saying, when you previously looked at a restaurant P&L, you had 3 big line items. You had your cost of goods, you had your labor, and you had your rent. Well, now that's all changed because your labor's pretty much gone away, or you've gone very minimal with your labor in terms of what you could or could do. But now you've got this massive expense in third-party delivery, whether it's Uber Eats or Postmates, and each one of them has a technology challenge, which again, to get at the information of, did I get paid the right amount? How did I get paid the right amount? And then there's consolidators and aggregators out there, whether it's Automark or someone else, that takes all these platforms and combines them, and again allows you to get more information with less. So I think I've taken my 10 minutes. I could go on for hours, But unfortunately, I think, the name of the game is we all have to manage with less, but we all need to get more information out. And how do we embrace those changes as finance leaders and change industry leaders to make that happen with the technology that's out there and drive it and see the changes in place?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Philip. I really appreciate it. That's, I mean, you truly wrapped your hands around, all of the different, I think in all industries, we all have, some differentiation, but the same. And it's the theme, as you said, is getting more with less, which is leading into the other discussion points that we have in this presentation, and our next topic of discussion is remote workforce. Thank you, Philip, for the current state of the market and wrap up.
Thanks.
Of course, going into the next, the two speakers, Henry will be one of them, and Tetsu will take lead. Tetsu Noguchi is a super diverse background in advertising, marketing, dealing with VC-funded technology companies, including VMware, Juniper Networks, Fortinet, just vast experience. And he's going to go ahead and head up the conversation for managing a remote workforce and maximizing performance and ROI. He's going to show CFOs and finance leaders how we can get the most out of our existing workforce or whoever we have left, and how to measure their performance. Tetsu, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ryan. I definitely appreciate that introduction. You certainly make me sound a lot better than I often feel. But let's get this segment going. This segment is titled really Digital Workforce Optimization. But you'll see here this segment title says the digital workplace. And the reason for that difference is digital workforce optimization looks at your entire workforce, how they operate, what infrastructure supports them, not just technology, but facility security, and how these groups and individuals within your workforce connect internally and externally. Digital workplace is really the technology foundation that supports your workforce. Next slide, please. So what is digital workplace? Digital workplace is really the tools you use to do three fundamental things: communicate, collaborate, and connect with other individuals in your organization and externally. And traditionally, email and phone were the primary methods of communication and collaboration. But over the last 20 to 10 to 5 years, newer and newer tools have emerged to help improve upon the traditional communication, collaboration, and connection tools. Tools like cloud services or soft phones that you can use to make phone calls directly from your computer. Or if you go even further, tools that help improve project management, tools that help improve product development cycles and how that translates. Better document management, so your employees, your workforce can actually see and find information much more quickly and efficiently. And then, of course, because of 2020, the big gorilla in the room, which is video conferencing. And here we have examples of Zoom, and of course, there's also Microsoft Teams and others as well. Next slide, please. So when we talk about digital workplace optimization, a fundamental component of your overall digital workforce operations, there are a lot of reasons that changes have been coming and why you need to rethink your strategy, even long before COVID-19 came into play in March of this year. Great example, new generations of people coming into the workforce have dramatically changed what tools you need to provide. No longer can companies have a policy to say when they're onboarding new people, here are the tools we use. Here's your email account, here's your phone, go get to work. Today, these individuals coming into the workforce, well, they've been using different communication and collaboration tools at a consumer level for much longer. So they're more comfortable with very different tools than traditional email and phone. And that means in order to make them effective, in order to attract them and keep them satisfied, companies now have to change their policies to accommodate those needs. Other unique things that have driven more innovation in the digital workplace space that a lot of people don't think about, different departments, different roles within your organization, they've come up with their own unique methods of collaboration and communication. Some of those, like Jira, where it focuses a lot on product development, software development, some of those features translate into other tools and translate really well for how an HR department would need to communicate, how a legal department would need to communicate. And so there have been a lot of innovations and a lot of products that have been emerging over the last 5 to 10 years. And being able to have a cohesive, seamless, well-integrated workplace optimization strategy is now more important than it ever was before. Next slide, please. Getting back to take another quick look at COVID and its impact, a lot of us have already seen and experienced since March the emergency lockdown, the work from home policies that governments have mandated, and it forced many companies to rethink how they do their technology. Now you have all of these telecommuters, you need to make sure their internet connections are up. They have all the tools that they need in order to be productive and effective in their roles. But now, as we move into 2021, there's going to be a new issue that emerges. You can't simply go from this COVID world and forced mandated work from home back to bringing everybody back to the office, because there are new concerns and anxieties in society today that didn't exist as much pre-COVID-19. That means ultimately you're going to have a hybrid strategy environment. You're going to have an environment that deals with telecommuters, that deals with people on site, but also within the same department, since you're going to have that variation. All of those tools need to work seamlessly together, department by department, and then of course, outside of the organization as well. Next slide, please. So earlier I talked about the different drivers that are really driving the digital workplace and why you need to come up with a new strategy and optimization. So some of the things that I mentioned are the new generation of people coming into the workforce and the tools that they are comfortable using. But from a productivity and an effectiveness perspective, there's also a lot of real value there. If you do your digital workplace strategy well, then you will have much greater adoption by all of your departments, from an individual level to a departmental level to an organizational level. There are real valuable returns on investment by investing carefully into the digital workplace. And finally, something that a lot of companies may not be talking about too much is technology service providers, technology consultants like Pandoblox, like 3GC Group, traditionally are looked at as consultants, implementers, supporters, developers for IT technologies, information technologies like your network, your servers. But a lot of what we as organization, technology service providers can offer today extends beyond that, looking at physical facility security, looking at healthcare applications and smart applications to support your employees as they start coming back to the office. Next slide, please. This is a great perspective, and it shows a change that we're seeing in the market across a lot of mid-enterprises. Traditionally, as I said earlier, companies will look at individuals coming on and onboard them, providing them and mandating the tools that they use. It is a very business and structure perspective on how to create communication, collaboration, and connecting tools for employees. But that's rapidly changing today. And a lot of companies are starting now with a strategy that focuses on the individual first. So we start by looking at the individuals, what their roles are, what their needs are, and then we work our way out. How do we get them to connect, collaborate, and communicate effectively? We move out one layer and we start looking at the tools that are available that they are willing to use that will make them work much more efficiently. But then we have to add in another factor, right? That next layer out looks at governance, compliance, and risk, regulatory issues that make demands on how secure your digital workplace strategy is. And finally, if you do all of that well, that final outer layer means you're going to have real results. And these are the different types of results that you'll see. If your digital workplace optimization strategy is strong, you're going to have more revenue. You're going to be able to save money. You're going to have greater innovation. You'll be able to improve the employee experience. And that focus from the inside, from the individual on out, is a change that we're seeing in almost every industry among mid-enterprises today. Next slide, please. So how do you, when you put a digital workplace optimization strategy together, a lot of things are going to be new. And there is a certain amount of education involved in making the decisions, but there's also a certain amount of guesswork involved. And that means you really need to measure the success of your solutions and make modifications and adjustments over time. And there's a lot of ways to do measurements. A difference between a KPI and a measurement is you can measure anything, but a KPI measures against a threshold and a goal. And it shows you whether you're succeeding in your implementations or not. If you pay $500,000 for a new communication collaboration tool, you want to make sure that your users are using them. And so at the very base level of KPIs, you have fundamental technology KPIs. Is your equipment working? Is it up? Is it performing as well as it should? The next level, or at the very top, are the kinds of KPIs that CFOs have long been comfortable with. How is your bottom line? Are you generating the revenue? Is your overall sales improving? Do you have the profit that you need? And then, of course, in HR as well, you want to track employee satisfaction and productivity. But the two in the middle there, that second and third layer, that's really the type of KPIs that companies need to start looking at and focusing now more than ever if they want to have a successful digital workplace optimization. That first one, that number 2, is adoption KPIs. This is really measuring over time. So if you purchase Zoom and you implement it, you purchase Microsoft Teams, you want to check to make sure that employees are actually using the platform. Maybe it has an adverse effect on email. You implement Slack, a collaboration tool. Suddenly you notice that your email has dropped dramatically. Maybe whole departments can get rid of email. Maybe that means you can stop paying for as many licenses for email as you currently are. So looking at adoption KPIs, which is basically measuring over time, is really critical. And then, of course, there's insight APIs. These look at your departments and how they're performing versus their goals. These types of departmental KPIs can also impact the decisions you make on making adjustments and fine-tuning your digital optimization strategy. Next slide, please. So here we just have a couple of quick examples. Earlier I mentioned adoption KPIs. These look at, for example, Zoom calls or MS Teams calls or email usage. And they give you the kind of information that you really need to understand whether users are actually using the tools that you're providing. If they're not, you're either overpaying for something that nobody is using, or you need to adjust the strategy, perhaps add some training, add some user groups or communities to help foster usage or utilization of those tools. Next slide, please. And of course, as an overlay on top of all this, you've probably been hearing this undertone throughout all the slides that I've been talking about, where we're really looking at employee satisfaction. At the end of the day, because you want your employees to be using these tools, to be satisfied with these tools, and be effective in your organization with these tools to help your bottom line, what we're really talking about here is this underlying current of digital culture. And you're looking at how do you make sure your employees are doing the things that they're supposed to be doing without looking like Big Brother, and really focusing on looking like an organization that cares about their employees and their employees' ability to function within your organization. Digital culture today is a much more fundamental and formalized process within an overall implementation strategy. Next slide, please. So this is one example of aggregate data or big data. When you first start taking a look at all your legacy tools for collaboration and communication, maybe you've already implemented Slack, maybe you've already started using MS Teams. Well, most companies have already been using Zoom or MS Teams for at least 9 months now. But all of these tools you currently have in place, and then you look at new tools that you might want to implement to help your organization function better. There's lots of different kinds of guesswork that you're going to have to make. There's industry best practices, what a lot of other organizations are doing with their implementations. You can learn from some of those as case studies. Another piece of information that you can draw from is big data. Large organizations like Google and Facebook have already done a fair amount of research on, as a very generalized rule, what tools are people using and how do those demographics break out? That can also help guide you a little bit in your initial strategy. This is just one example of many. I like this slide a lot because it sort of shows how big data can break things down en masse to help guide you in your organization. In particular, I really like Outlook email. This shows that baby boomers and Generation Xers, we grew up, and I say we, I'm Gen X, I'm not baby boomer in case anybody's wondering. We grew up in a world with email as a forced technology on us, and of course, cell phone usage. So email is something we're very comfortable with. We use very, very easily and quickly, and we are familiar with all the ins and outs, the pros and cons of email. But you'll notice that younger generations, millennials, and even more dramatically with Generation Z, these demographics don't have a lot of experience with email. As they were growing up, they were using very different tools to communicate, connect, and collaborate with their peers, with their friends, academically and socially. And so as they enter the workforce, and if your organization has a very large community segment that is millennials and Generation Z, it can help guide the kind of digital optimization strategy you really want to move forward with, and what tools you want to implement and pay for to make sure that your organization is working effectively. Next slide, please. So all of this leads into a very iterative process. And of course, CQI models you have seen in a variety of different types of projects where you're constantly reevaluating and making adjustments. The same holds true for digital workplace. When you first decide to put a true digital workplace strategy in place, you're talking about a series of tools that need to work seamlessly together. They need to be integrated. And that means you're going to make some guesses initially when you do that implementation. But then comes the next part, which is the critical component. Once you implement that strategy, you then have to measure and track usage over time. Is adoption of those tools increasing? Are the number of minutes those tools being used increasing? Are departments being more productive? Is your sales organization closing more deals? Are they increasing their funnel? Are they able to get more first meetings? All of these types of measurements are impacted by your digital workplace optimization strategy. And that will then in turn guide you to fine tune your strategy. In some cases, you can get rid of licenses. You might save money. In some cases, you just need to make some configuration changes to your technology. In some cases, it has nothing to do with technology at all. And what you really need to do is some more training. So all of that guidance with the fine tuning strategy will then lead you to a new strategy. And that is that iterative process. Like the famous arrow that always goes half the distance to the target, you get closer and closer to, I guess what I'll term as that utopian digital workplace strategy. And the goal is to get as close as you can. The expectation should not be that you'll achieve that utopia on day one. Next slide. And this is just a final slide that I wanted to give as an example. Earlier, I mentioned that technology consultancies, technology implementers like 3GC, Pandoblox, and many others, they are no longer providing just fundamental technology services, peripheral technology services, application support. Today, these technology companies like us are providing services and technologies directly related to the emergencies that we've had to deal with in 2020, like suddenly having to work from home, but also now providing services around how to bring employees back to the office safely so that employees feel safe, feel comfortable coming back to the office. And these technologies include things like temperature checks as you're going into the door that are automated, improved automatic door systems with touchless, contactless RFID, healthcare apps that give users information on any nearby outbreaks that may have occurred. You work in a big building or a campus, you find out that another department in your organization tested positive for COVID-19. Do you go home? Do you stay at the office? A lot of that depends on your proximity and your potential for interacting with that other department. And so tools today can help you make those decisions by giving you real-time information. And so there's a lot more that companies like us provide that aren't really traditionally looked at as technology service providers. And that's it. Thank you very much. That's digital workplace optimization strategies.
Perfect. Thank you, Tetsu. Really appreciate it. It's very insightful, strategies and the framework of, what we're all going to need, to get us back to on pace and ready for 2021. So perfect. We're going to be moving on to security and compliance. Nicole Gosens and John Gordon will be presenting. Quick overview of Nicole. She has experience in dealing with very, very complex security issues. She's done this for Disney, IndyMac, various other companies. Security and compliance is, for her, it's dealing with the most complex environments, but applying it in an extremely practical and applicable way for day-to-day operations. She has experience in protecting intellectual property and just spot on when it comes to anything with cybersecurity. John also will be leading up on the conversation, and he has a multitude of experience, from heading up projects at Monsanto, Anheuser-Busch, and other Fortune 100 companies. He has a multitude of experience and just different areas, overlapping, but just enterprise architecture down to the technology launch, and iterations that it takes to build up from there. Both of them are fantastic. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the intro.
Of course.
Okay, we can go to the first slide. Thank you. The first slide, please. Next one. Great. So as Ryan alluded to, I love security and I love talking to CFOs. One typical thing that CFOs have said to me in the past is like, oh, information security, it's kind of like buying car insurance. You pay for the protection and a one-off chance something might happen. But if you really apply this analogy to security, it's more like buying car insurance for a blindfolded driver going the wrong way on the freeway trying to navigate a bunch of drunk drivers. So if you kind of look at it in that scenario and you consider how the odds are stacked against you with security, and it's not a might happen, but will happen, is it really like buying car insurance? So we live in a world now that it's hard to pass up like news or business articles that are not talking about some major security incident. We all know all industries, all size companies, private, public, are in jeopardy. So there's nation state attacks that are funded by governments, like we're seeing trending now in the news with the SolarWinds attack. This was very planned. They compromised the security firm FireEye. FireEye supports and provides strategies for the US Treasury, Homeland Security, more. So as you can see, like attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated. But still, even like the less sophisticated attacks are proving, to be bankable and even more effective. So for example, like ransomware attacks are plaguing healthcare providers. There's daily phishing attacks, wins that are causing companies billions of recovery dollars every year. So let's take a look at some of the industry stats here. So cybercrime is now mobile. This is important because the attack landscape has changed. So 80% is achieved through a mobile app and 60% of online fraud is accomplished through a mobile platform. This means that there's more ways and tools to compromise your business. So if you think about it, are you even thinking about like what a mobile attack looks like? Or is your business prepared? If you're not, you're behind. If you don't have any clue, you should already be having these conversations. Another important stat here is the average downtime for ransomware attacks is 19 days. So what financial and operational impact to your business is going to occur for being down that long? Could you actually survive that? Look at Internet of Things, IoT devices tripled in the first half of 2019. So if you look at all tech now, everything talks to each other. It's wireless, it's hands-free, everybody's, hey Siri, hey Alexa, it's very convenient, but IoT opens a lot of—
Sorry, I don't know that one.
Sorry, my Alexa's talking to me. But basically, IoT, as convenient as it is, it opens a lot of opportunities for attack. So again, these are just some things your business needs to really be thinking about on how the technology has changed and how we can't just be thinking about like antivirus on a computer and things like that. You have to consider mobile, you have to consider IoT. And then also too, business size. It's not just the large businesses. It's not just the Sonys, the Experians, the Targets. 28% of data breaches is involved in small businesses. So, you know, nobody's left unscathed in this. 80% of breaches were financially motivated. So that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but cybercrime, 1.5 trillion a year, trillion. So that's more revenue than Apple and Google pull in 1 year. So think about that. This is one of the most lucrative, whatever you want to call it. It's not a business, right? But most lucrative functions that is out there. That's a lot of money, and there's a lot of incentive to do harm. Great. We can jump to the next slide. So what does a data breach cost you? So 2020 has been an impactful year for many reasons. You know, cyber criminals did not disappoint this year, along with everything else that we've had to deal with. So as I mentioned before, we are talking about a $1.5 trillion industry. That's what you're up against. In the US, the average cost of a data breach ranged somewhere between just under $4 million to $8 million. That, of course, depends on the company size, the type of impact. Can be much more than that, can be slightly less than that, but that's a lot of money. And to kind of put it in perspective, you know, a typical data breach costs $140 per record. So try to imagine like, and how you would scale that out in your business. So if you take, I'm going to say a small amount of data, which would be about 20,000 records, and you multiply that out, that's $2.8 million. So think about in your business and sheer amounts of data that is stored about that, you know, can cause some type of harm. Think about how that would scale for you if a small amount is 2.8 million. If your company are in scope for any type of regulatory mandates like GDPR or CCPA, GDPR for data privacy, they fine you up to 20 million or 4% of your company's annual revenue. So they're making money hand over fist, issuing out hefty fines right now. They started off with the bigger companies, but they're now assigning penalties to individual complaints. That means one person makes a complaint, and if they find that investigation to be true, they're handing out huge fines. CCPA, if you do business in California, they have an enforcement fine of $2,500 to $7,500 per violation. If it involves a minor, it's on the higher end of that. So, you know, these are things that are, you know, you have to be thinking about. You know, I can throw statistics at you all day, but they really should be kind of front of mind on how serious this is. And the easiest path to compromise is a phishing scam. So what's the stat here? $17,700 are lost every minute with the phishing scam. And it's the easiest. And I'll kind of give you an example on why it's easy. So we do spend a lot of money on protecting the network. We put antivirus on computers. We do all of these things, right? We give people badges, and you have 2 factors to log in. But guess what? A trusted employee already has the keys to the kingdom. They already have their rights to do their job. They're already in there. So guess what? There's no barrier to entry to send an email. So when an email is sent to them, it bypasses all security, and the defense is purely up to the employee at that point. And when they make a mistake, they're in. They bypassed all of the security that's been put in. That is why that is so lucrative. So I think that one is probably one of the scarier ones on here. So basically, there's so much at risk: your company reputation, litigation, loss of future business, fines, penalties. All of these things are at stake. But to make it even more personal, your job can be at stake here. So an example I wanted to share with you all is the FACC, which is an aerospace manufacturer. They had a huge breach a few years back. So both their CEO and CFO were fired after the breach. Basically, just give you background on the attack, the CEO, it was basically a CEO board impersonation attack. So basically somebody impersonated somebody at a higher rank, and they talked to the finance team into transferring out $55 million. So they were able to recover only 10 million of that. Ouch, right? So, you know, think about it. Have you considered how your job would be impacted in a major security incident? Okay, next slide, please. So this, you know, this graph kind of represents just by industry, kind of putting dollars to you know, breaches or security incidents. So again, you really see there's no industry that's untouched or goes unnoticed by cyber criminals. They hit everything. So I'll let these numbers kind of soak in for a minute. Unfortunately, here you can see healthcare and financial industries get hit the hardest. That doesn't mean they're attacked more, but they have more financial risk going in. So pretty scary stuff. Okay, we can move on. Thank you. Next slide. So what this comes down to is really, why should you care, right? You're CFO. This may or may not be at the front of your mind. But what I want you to kind of understand is, where does your responsibility lie? Like, what should you care about? And I can kind of tell you where, you know, like high functioning CFOs that are really engaged into the security program, like what they're doing. So, you know, companies are modeled different ways, but either, you know, a CFO typically, or a chief information officer or a chief technology officer is usually responsible for the company's cybersecurity program. This is not new. This has kind of been done since security programs were a thing. But what's changed from a CFO's perspective is that the security program is no longer the kind of this organization that operates autonomously without like your regular involvement. The security organization now is essentially a risk management function. So, you know, which is why it's so closely aligned to what CFOs have you know, operated it in every aspect of their job, right? I mean, CFO is essentially a risk function, you know. So in fact, we are also seeing trends that security programs and leaders are now reporting to chief revenue officers. So like, what is that really telling us? That's telling us that there's even a greater shift to risk, company revenue, finances, into how security is being handled in the company. So there is definitely a direct connection between financial risk and security risk. So CFOs today are expected to understand security and technology investments. They need to understand how resilient their organization is against attacks. You know, when there are major events, a lot of times CFOs are the ones sitting at the table giving this information to investors or to board members. You know, CFOs are officers of the company, so they, you know, they also influence the security culture of the company. So if you yourself don't have are promoting a strong security culture, that's going to reflect down. If you are kind of embracing a strong security culture, that's going to reflect down. So all of that, the CFO involvement is extremely, extremely important. Let's see. Also CFOs, you know, typically are champions of like the security policy. So any like security policies that are created, that are issued internally and externally, it's very common for CEOs to sign off on those, to champion those. CFOs are often expected to assess cybersecurity risks, right? Align with the cybersecurity strategy with the business, and get the buy-in from the board if that's, you know, if that's necessary, you know, with cybersecurity investments. So you can see CFOs today are very active in the security program, or they should be, right? But understand this, the most common impediment to developing an enterprise-wide cybersecurity strategy is the lack of understanding of cybersecurity risk and the potential impacts of a breach. That is the fundamental thing that you should take away here, is that's the gap. That's what you need to understand. And that's the connection you should make. Great, we can move on to the next slide. So I really want to kind of leave you with, you know, understanding how your role can optimize your company's cybersecurity strategy. Arm you with some things here. So first of all, you should absolutely know where you are vulnerable, where your company is vulnerable. This is a combination of knowing like what you care about protecting, like what's valuable to your company, and also where your weaknesses are. So all businesses have different risk tolerances as well. So your technology and security leaders should be very clear, where the board and officers of the company stand with business risk and tolerance. So I like to give the example, like, banks and pharmaceuticals are highly regulated. They're hesitant and slow to change. They need to maintain really strict and formal security practices. Whereas like a young tech company, they might be on the cutting edge of exploring new technologies. They also have an easier time recovering from risky decisions. So being really clear about the company's risk tolerance will really help and arm your tech leaders, to solution correctly, to spend correctly, and all of their future security investments. And then also, if you're armed with the understanding of your security risk profile, you will also be better equipped to advocate for or not for the right security investments as well. So you don't want to spend $10,000 to protect an asset worth $100,000, and you don't want to spend $10,000 to protect an asset worth $10 million. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this is really just kind of give you guys a snapshot skyline view of a security posture of a particular company in a moment of time. So just to kind of understand what you're looking at here, the gray area represents the desired level of security for this particular company. So, each business is unique. Not every aspect of security needs need to be achieved at every level, right? So based on this particular business needs, the gray background, the gray skyline represents, hey, in this particular area of security, this is the top level we want to achieve. However, in contrast, the blue area is where this particular company ranked at that point in time when this assessment was done. So when you overlay the two, you get a really quick visual on where the company is mature and excelling and where the company is at risk. So the big dips really gives you a good idea of where you should focus. Basically your security investments, your risk strategy, all of those things. And I think at the CFO level, having this level of understanding, this is something that you should be able to pull out of your back pocket at any given time and be able to talk to this, at least at this level of security. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Hi, this is John Gordon. Can you get the next slide, please? Thank you. So Nicole just showed you a snapshot of a security landscape. So how do you get there? How do you get that snapshot? It's with an assessment. And I'm here to talk about this one slide, which is what does a security assessment look like? For many companies, when they're talking about security and doing an assessment, it's usually through an end user perspective. Like, do we have antivirus set up, and do we have remote connectivity or VPN? Those are the two most common things that people think about when they think about security. However, as you noticed on Nicole's slide, a thorough assessment covers everything as part of that security process, from identifying the business needs to protecting the environment, detecting when somebody's in there, having a security response team available, and then doing actual recovery and continual improvement in the environment. And with an assessment, it varies by company too. You notice that on that chart that it wasn't all fours across the top of that chart. The reason why it dips down on that horizon that she talked about is your company needs are different than my company needs or your neighbor's company needs. And therefore, a security assessment should be tailored to what your needs are and what your risk tolerance is going to be within your environment. That each of those values are going to be different for you, and they're going to be different for me. And therefore, when you're looking at an assessment, it's something that when you're going through that, it's something that's a very thorough process. A lot of companies, when they're doing a security assessment today, sometimes they're just looking to check a box off on their compliance questionnaire for a partner, or maybe something related to SOX, or something related to the government. And those might cost like $10, $15, maybe $20,000 or so. But a thorough investment takes, as you saw before, it covers everything across the whole board with the company from a security perspective. And that's where you're looking at, costing minimally about $40,000 or $50,000, or depending upon your compliance needs or the size of your company, an assessment could cost you a lot more than that. And what I say, I shouldn't actually be using the word cost. I should probably be using the word investment. That a security assessment is an investment into your company. It's an investment into your future to protect the assets that you have around you, just like you do with doing regular security or doing regular audits of your own company. So to sum it all up here, because I know I'm running out of time, run over time here, doing a security assessment is really more of an investment in your company and the next steps in your future. So thank you very much. Ryan, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate it. And it's to everyone on the call. Again, we're here not to scare you or do anything, but to bring light and to let you know that, we're here to simplify and mitigate a lot of this liability, because we do have an understanding of this. This is something we do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. So moving on to our next topic, we're moving on to finance operations and optimization. This is going to be led by David Lopez and Bob Van Dusen. I have the pleasure of introducing both of them. David is a enterprise CTO, focused on extremely thorough, basically architecture of complex issues, handles things from EQ standpoint, and has just a fantastic overview of technology leadership for companies. Bob Van Dusen is just, a very rare unicorn of a CIO/CISO. He led Blizzard Entertainment from 100 employees to 6,000 employees, has taken it from 0 subscribers to hundreds of millions of subscribers. So he has a true scaling understanding and capacity to handle things at a different level. So the vast experience of these two gentlemen is bar none. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to them.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. So, we titled this section Financial Operations Optimization, but if we go to the next slide, we can go through and we can really talk about kind of I think it's a much bigger topic at this point, simply because there is just no financial operations optimization. It's really, we're really looking at this as from the entire organization. And right now, most of the CFOs, I'm sure everybody on here has been through what we call a traditional ERP, or go through a implementation of a traditional platform. That would be your SAPs, your Oracles, your Infors, Dynamics, choose your flavor, a Navision or whatever Microsoft has bought. And these vertical ERPs, they had a place and a purpose. They were really kind of groundbreaking back in the day. When Philip was talking about his investments that he made, some of us remember those days. But they're huge. They're monolithic. They're basically a real jack of all trades system, but really a master of none. But they kind of checked all the boxes for the different functions that they needed to do for the organizations. But if you move forward in today's world, these platforms, they're monolithic. Then they're kind of, depending on where their focus is, they can be slow to react to different parts of your business. And really, if we look at how fast businesses change, there was already the digital influence of business before COVID. And we're all in the middle of what happened this year, how fast businesses had to change and adopt. And a lot of these platforms or all of them, they were still on their same release cycles, once a year, twice a year. And the changes to the business it was not there for them. It's then they also, again, they have to have all the features. They have to do all the check boxes, and that introduces a lot of complexity. When Oracle is going to compete against NetSuite and Dynamics, it's a lot of those RSPs are just check boxes, and it introduces complexity. And it's really hard to say, do those features actually matter? Firms have had to, as we've gone through, now that we're really driving measurements down to the customer level. How is your ERP and your infrastructure system really going down and driving those decisions down to your customer level? And it's really hard to draw those links. There's a lot of ways that companies have done it. They've done, implemented very expensive reporting systems on top of that, but it's been, pretty inefficient and pretty ineffective. And I think that there's a lot of companies right now that they're, that they're really looking at those investments and needing to draw those straight lines and having some problems getting there. The lack of it is also, from the traditional ERP systems, even though they're trying to, by tying the different components together, getting real-time insights has been tricky. It's rolled up monthly reporting, weekly reporting. That's kind of the worlds that they came from. But now business moves at real time or even advanced time, and they need to be able to look ahead. And being able to tie in these type of metrics, real-time metrics, have been problematic. And the part of that issue kind of ties into our last point on this slide, that ERPs are built on, that they came up from basically your basic accounting systems, tied in a little bit of the manufacturing specialties, a little bit of the operating specialties. And as we've moved into the digital world, the digital marketing world, everything web and mobile first, these systems have been very slow to react on those new realities as being the monoliths that they are. So, where do we go from here? So next slide. So really, if you start looking at what we're calling the digital operations optimization world, what we really need to start looking at as, systems that are built from the ground up to be, intelligent and extensible and, and adaptive. If you start looking at the where it should be. So I think COVID and where we are right now is really a great example of how systems really need to be able to almost turn on a dime, because when your business changes, you could be, really focused on growing a sales organization. Well, that sales organization is, your sales organization does its job and really starts expanding your production lines. So if your business, where you can be focused in your CRM side of the world, but if you aren't able to quickly scale your, your MMS, your warehouse management, your production pipeline systems, then it doesn't do any good, because you have a sales organization that's knocking it out of the park, but you can't get into and scale and be adapted towards the other things to allow, the success that scale, that the sales organization to be able to turn into real revenue. Scalable is also a fact. So scalable has been referred to, as when we start talking in the digital world, to go from 1 to 1 million transactions. Well, in the COVID world, that also means to be able to scale the systems down. You don't want to pay for any services that you're not using. A lot of the traditional ERP models are based on the number of users or transactions. And when you get into those contracts, once you get into a minimum with Oracle, getting out of that minimum is almost impossible. But that's kind of the old way of thinking, and being able to get into new models and new contracts and new systems where you can easily scale up and down is more critical now than ever. Accessibility is also, it's again, going to Philip's point, some of us did start on the green screens, and you had a terminal that could sit on a desk, and that's where you had to go do the work on it. That's not today. It is, accessibility means that, especially CFOs, that if you aren't getting the data where you are on the devices that you have, and being able to get that data to every person depending on where they are, that they can be actionable and accessible regardless of the situation, regardless of where they are. It just doesn't work in this day and age. Whether it's just forced by remote computing, getting your key people in front of the customers, in front of the problems wherever they are globally, is now more important than ever. We are going to be back in the office. We are going to be traveling again. We are going to be spreading out our organization. So having those systems accessible and not on terminals and not just on a web browser that it has to be accessed in an office, those days are over. If your ERP systems or your core systems can't do that, they're not doing your business service. And then lastly, AI about 3 years ago was a myth. It was kind of a unicorn. There were some companies that were saying that they were doing it. And kind of, there was, even on that side of it, there was a lot of skepticism. That's not the case. Really, over the last couple of years, every business right now has an opportunity to use AI. The smallest business, $10 million, up to small, medium, and even the largest businesses really need to start baking in an AI strategy, because these technologies are really available up and down the stack. Even QuickBooks is starting to use AI, and we've got some examples of that to be able to go through. So any business, even the little mom and pop coffee shops, can start using this. Next slide, please. So I really want to kind of give you, let's go ahead and start this kind of the nightmare scenario of when CFOs start talking to CIOs and they start getting engaged with technology. You start seeing these are the TLAs, the three-letter abbreviations that make a joke of the IT world. And they are, it gives IT, your CIOs, your CTOs kind of a bad name, but they're incredibly important. So these are, when you start breaking it down, these are all the building blocks. These are the individual systems that run your organizations. They all have their own individual purpose. They all provide their own individual function. They all add to your business. They all drive revenue. They all drive productivity, and they all fit together in their own unique way. And so, up to a few years ago, that the CIOs and the CTOs used to, I think is a nice word, obfuscate to the rest of the business. Use these TLAs, be able to talk in these terms, and then everybody would kind of gloss over. And they kind of use this as a barrier to entry, but we have gone through and kind of approached this, working especially with non-technical people in a little bit of a different way. And if we go to the next slide. So one of the things that we go through when we start working with the non-CI, your CEOs and your CFOs, we start talking about technology, not from vendors, not from the TLAs, from all of the different data points, but really where we want to start is really understanding where your value stream is either inefficient for some of your key business capabilities, or it can use improvement, or we can even go through, if we're in the right business, that we'll have some of these that are green. As CFOs, these should be familiar. This is your lingua franca, if you will. This is how you talk about your business. It is your major processes and then the business capabilities below each one of them. These are either working well for your businesses. These are areas of improvement. These are direct events or functions that lead to bottom line, that lead to productivity improvements. And when we start talking about these with your non-tech groups, what this does is we are having a much bigger conversation about your business improvements. And then, if you go through and you say, guys, I'm having some really issues with cash to order. This is not, my cash to order on my bottom line is not where it needs to be in our organization. The next conversation is that we start looking and we start going back to those individual building blocks, if you will, and we say, we can go through and saying, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, can we take and implement one of these building blocks? Supply chain management system, part of a supply chain management system, a warehouse system, maybe part of the CRM, to improve these individual functions. The ERP system comes in, and when you do an ERP, they want to boil the ocean. They say, we're going to affect all of these directly. You give us a 7-8 figure figure budget, a 24, 36 month implementation period. All of these will be green. Yes, they would all be green, but your business and your customers and the world has advanced 36 months from when you originally did your RFP. So, there's a definite gap there. And what our strategy is, let's go through and look at what is important on this list. What do you want to tackle? Where you have your deficiencies? Where are you really need to focus on your business today? Where you want to focus on your business tomorrow? And as we start implementing each one of these the individual building blocks, we come back. Did we meet your expectations? Are you seeing a result in the bottom line? Good. Now, where do you want to go and make your investment? And so we really look at doing this, being able to start with this value stream is we're doing technology improvements. We're looking at it more like surgery with a scalpel rather than the large monolithic ERP systems, which is surgery with a chainsaw. Next slide, please. So, we also want to talk about the impact of the cloud. So, this is kind of something that's been talked a lot about. For the CFO side of it, the biggest point that we want to make here is, it is the impact of the cloud from a CFO's perspective really comes down to a lot of things that your businesses, there are really only 3 businesses that really can achieve a significant business differentiator running hardware inside their organizations. And those 3 businesses are Microsoft, Google, and Amazon through their AWS cloud platforms. Those days of being able to optimize hardware, software, networks, BSP advantage is over. And really, you need to be focusing on, your entire organization needs to be focusing on applications. It needs to be focusing on data. Somebody that was running a server farm, or where you had a server farm, that person needs to be, that headcount, that resource really needs to be a business analyst driving revenue, driving productivity. And then the second side of it is, as we go through, your businesses are 7 by 24. Let's go back and start talking about, security. I hate following Nicole on any type of presentation, simply because I think that people start going, my only solution to keep my system safe is, big cheap tablets and number 2 pencils. But these cloud vendors, that Microsoft's and those guys, that their spend on R&D and security is in the billions. You can't do any better than those guys. And really, as you start moving those resources to the cloud, high availability, not having to run hot sites, not having to maintain colo facilities where you have to buy 2 of everything in order to have resiliency. Those days are over. So really, that's why we really like, being able to, where it's appropriate, being able to come in and not implement necessarily a full cloud solution, but really start working with organizations, hybrid solutions. Let's get things into the cloud, simply because, again, you're not managing hardware, which gives you absolutely no competitive advantage. Next slide. So this is actually funny. This is a pre-COVID slide that has been used a lot. Reasons for cloud adoption. The reason I just kind of wanted to point that out, this is how fast the world changes. Even before COVID, 47% of people said, reason to go to cloud is remote working. For a lot of organizations, it was March 15th. I'm sure that number jumped to 90%. So that was kind of the shutdown day in California. So that just shows you kind of COVID and the remote work and that kind of driving is just really a differentiator. But just to kind of show you how fast the world is really moving now. Next slide. So I want to kind of talk about how we look at these, going back to, if we were trying to figure out a good way to overlay our rocket ship slide, showing all of the puzzle pieces interlocking together, how they kind of move in the areas of business that you have. So you have, your products, design, quality, safety, product information managers, and R&D. Those are all very different functions, and those are very different puzzle pieces, if you will, different systems that can fit together in a granular level. Some companies need all 4 of them. Very few do, that we come across. And so when we can go through and implement the right piece, and only the right piece, it makes, to address the products issue, that's a great way to be able to approach it. I really want to go through, we have products, finance, people, supply chain, customers, it's a standard thing. But really on the HR side of it is where we're seeing a lot of these really kind of minuscule, really point solutions around dealing with HRIS issues. Where you'd have Workday that kind of is an all-in-one, very good tool. Love Workday. It is also incredibly expensive. But if you start looking at some of the other the point solutions, companies like 15Five is a great example that allows you to do, especially in a remote workforce environment where you don't have to make the solution, but you can set up 15.5, if you're not familiar with it, does a great job at going ahead and doing one-on-ones, allowing you to do remote one-on-ones, allowing you to measure and mentor users to do real 360 views of your workforce. And it is an isolated solution, and a lot of companies will use something like that to be able to go through and solve, what is a very large organizational challenge, especially in remote workforce, without having to make the huge monolithic investment in a Workday or a large solution. In finance terms, if you start looking at the accounting side of it, I think that for those in Southern California, a great point solution when you start talking about getting into automation is look at the success of Blackline. Great solution that is going through and being able to do a lot of automation on systems. And the major vendors, if you start looking at your Oracles, your SAPs, they are just there's no way that they can catch up with the advantage because of what Blackline was focused on. So we've got a lot of solutions for that. So let's go through to the kind of the last slide, and we'll kind of wrap this up. So the benefits of a digital optimized operation is, so basically when you can go through and buy a point solution that does exactly what it needs to do, that is, it's cheaper to be able to put that in because you don't have to code the solution. We can configure it. You can turn it on, use it off the shelf. It's lowers your cost of ownership. The second part of it is the being able to go through automation. I talked about Blackline. A lot of the point solutions, when they deal with very specific areas and they really kind of focus on one area of business that they want to improve, not only do they build a better solution that really kind of out of the box fits, they also are able to go through and automate, do a lot of automation. So you don't have to add a lot of resources in order to improve and make it work. There is a normalization process. So these vendors also had to go through and work around, being able to play in these spaces. So they created their own language that allows these building blocks to put together very easily and seamlessly. And again, it's also, microservices. I want to talk about, that you can go through and scale down and find solutions for very, very specific needs, again, without having to spend large amounts of money just to be able to get in and deal with individual problems that you have in your organization that lead back to that value, the value chain that we talked about. And lastly, everybody's building in AI. Again, I can't overstate that this is a real technology that we've seen work down to mom and pop companies. And you should be expecting whatever solutions you have to be able to take advantage of that. So next slide, please. And thank you, everyone. And I'll throw it back to Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, John, Bob. So yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. As you can see, your experience and, presentation that you put through, we do offer white glove service in everything that we do. I want to thank everybody, for touching on all the topics. It's fantastic. We're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. If any of the attendees, on this conference want to go ahead and ask any questions, now would be the time to do so. The team and I are available for anything that we can do to help you guys out with. Brett, Amanda, Steve, anybody has any questions? You're all on mute if not. Do we have everybody blocked off?
Well, thank you for the presentation. It's very informative. A lot of good information there.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, perfect. I guess if nobody has any questions, I'll just wrap it up, and say thank you to everybody. Really appreciate the time spent. I'll be contacting out to everybody individually to get your, if you'd like to partake in the free assessment. It's not required, but it's something that we're offering. It is, in depth and will provide a lot of value to you and your teams. Again, just anything that you need, go ahead and contact us. If you do decide to move forward with the questionnaire, we just need to know which discussion topic. You can only pick one of the three that we went over today. There's a questionnaire that needs to be filled out. So if you can just email me, let me know. And if you have any friends or colleagues that you feel would benefit from, our team and services, just go ahead and send that over. As you coordinate for the assessment, we'll be scheduling those in January and February of next year. If we don't hear from anybody, have fantastic holidays and a strong close out to the year. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you all. Zoom
You're welcome.
wave. See y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. How do you guys think it went?
Are we recording?
We should probably stop the recording.